Time for some Type 40 Extra. Here with me exclusively, I'm Dan Hadley, Birmingham's King of the Geeks. Welcome back. Type 40 is our before show, after show, and in between show to all the podcasts and live streams and everything else that we put out under the Type 40 banner. Sometimes they're sort of casual chit-chat things. Other times they're full discussions about some hot button topic. This time we've dragged somebody in unwittingly for another one. Who's it going to be? Well, I'll tell you right now. It's him. It's my mate. Back. We've got you back.
I have returned.
You can't say you haven't been.
Kicking and screaming.
So yeah, this is where we scroll the entire Whooniverse, Will, clocking the fixed points or not so fixed points throughout all space and time, both off and on screen. I've got a few things to talk about, but we always start with one of these. A nice warm image. This is our TARDIS of the week, and this is at the home of Ricky Butler, who lives in Ascot in Doncaster, South Yorkshire. And you can see that he's got quite a collection, quite an assortment of almost full-size replicas there in his backyard. So we've got, what is it we've got? He's travelling the fictional universes. He's having a mashup, isn't he? Because we've got K9 and R2-D2 together at last.
Brilliant. I used to always wish when I was a boy that I could build a full-size police box. And I used to ask my dad if he would do it. And there was no way he was going to. But I used to fantasize about, wouldn't it be great to have a TARDIS in the back garden?
You start measuring up, get a tape measure and measure a perfect square. In one, it's just enough room there, Dad.
Yeah. I was on Northwest News years and years ago. There was a dad did that. They had an outside toilet, and he, as a present to his son, he worked on it secretly through the year and turned it into a TARDIS. And because he was an electrician, he had all like control panels and flashing lights inside it, and then they unveiled it to this little boy that he now had his own TARDIS, and it got shown on the news. And after seeing that, I must have been about 10 or something, just thinking, I wish my dad would do that.
Did they do the reveal as well, sort of live on the news? So it's like, da-da, and they see the little kid's face.
Yeah, it might have been a pre-recorded shoot, but yeah, you saw that the lad's delight as he entered his own TARDIS. Brilliant. I envy anyone who can build their own stuff like that.
I don't know who I envy more, the child or the parent in that in that setup. But what I like about what Ricky's got here is that he's dressed the part as well. I think he's kind of living the dream there. So he's wearing a full scarf. It's not an exact replica of Tom's. It's more a hodgepodge Doctor Who outfit, isn't it? Like he's cast himself as his own Doctor.
Yeah. Is the another missing incarnation.
So it says Ricky is a retired actor, and the whole thing was he spent lockdown. This was a lockdown project, so he wanted to transform his back garden into a sci-fi fanatic's ultimate fantasy. It says here in the local paper. Ricky is 67, or he was 67, from Doncaster, and he is now the proud owner of his very own Doctor Who, Dalek, TARDIS, K9, and R2-D2 there. That's a sort of, that's the old phone box as well, the red one on the right.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I was just thinking I quite admire that. Yeah, the old-fashioned telephone box.
That looks
I used to play in one of those when I was a boy. I used to pretend it was the TARDIS. It was on the corner of a street near where I lived, a red telephone box. So I used to go in and out of it, pretending I'd landed on different planets. And then the gentleman who lived at the house next to it came out and told me off for vandalizing the telephone box. And I said, I am not vandalizing the telephone box. I am pretending it is a TARDIS. And then he sent me on my way anyway.
It wasn't going to cut much mustard with some of them, does it? So apparently this TARDIS itself is 8 foot. It's 8 foot tall, and he used real timber and thick plywood, and the plastic sheets are in place to make up the windows there. Can you guess how much this cost, Ricky, to put it together? Would you like to try and nail it down?
Oh, I have no idea. How much would that cost? No idea.
Yeah, this obviously doesn't include the labour. So his materials, it all came to £350
for everything,
all in. Yeah, including the paint. Obviously, this was before the cost of living crisis, Will, so it may have gone. But it says here, we've got a quote here from Ricky, and he told the local paper, when the first lockdown was announced, I just couldn't get my head around it. I thought, what's the point of doing anything? I was really upset, and it affected my mental health as there was nothing for me to do. But having a project to focus on really helped me. I'm retired now. I've got all the time in the world, so I could do it an hour or two at a time, and it really helped my mental health. I'm so pleased with how they look. They're just great. It's over the moon there. What Mrs. Ricky thinks about this, she's not in the paper.
Yeah, or his neighbours at the back there. Yeah, who open their bedroom curtains to it.
Yeah, I don't think it's in the way of the washing line, at least, so block too much sun. But this is the kind of we used to call people like this great British eccentrics, didn't we?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and there's some truth to that, isn't there, Will?
I think there is. It's not entirely unique to the British mindset, but yeah, we have a long history, don't we, of eccentric people doing strange things, but in their own minds, it's perfectly reasonable.
It took Ricky 6 weeks to do it all in all. It would have taken me a lot longer, I have to say. I'm not the most practical person in the world. I'm very willing, but less able, if you follow me.
Don't give me a hammer and nails, my word, as my wife will testify. Dangerous.
So obviously Doctor Who's been running now for 60 years. We're in the 60th anniversary year, and there are generations upon generations worth of eccentrics, probably well fueled by the Doctor's adventures. I think the things that we've seen on screen, the adventures that the Doctors have had, stimulate the imagination, stimulate our creativity, and yes, sometimes do get us into trouble either with the neighbours, for example, your incident there in the phone box, or with members of the family. Well, I think we're going to touch on some of that in this conversation. So yeah, as always on Type 40 Extra, I have been scrolling the Whovians to see what people are talking about. And over the last couple of days, this over on Twitter, people have been talking about the Ambassadors of Death, the 1970 Doctor Who story. Now this is a strange one. Obviously, it was the third of season 7, wasn't it? The third of the 4 stories. 7-parter, bit of a monster, bit of a bum number. I need at least 7, sometimes 8 sittings to get through this. I find this one a bit of a struggle. But it's a very enigmatic story, I think. And not least of all, because it's obviously it's one of Liz Shaw's just 4 appearances, isn't it? And she's retained, hasn't she? Because she was on the show for so comparatively little compared to the others. We didn't get to know her anywhere near to the extent that we did Joe Grant, Sarah Jane, did we? So do you know what I mean about Liz? She's got an enigma about her, isn't she?
Yeah. And what's interesting is that she's still fascinating character and one that we talk about. And we like, on Big Finish, they brought her daughter in to play her character. And she lives on in Big Finish. So it's the fact that it's someone who was only in it for 4 stories, she has a legacy. So that's testament to the writing and testament to Carolyn John's acting.
And obviously she was estranged from the Doctor Who community for a while, wasn't she? Because she believed that her character wasn't well received and wasn't as cherished, perhaps, as some of the others. She'd got that into her head, hadn't she? And it took an appearance at a convention where she got this rapturous applause to switch her on to how much the fans really did love her and want to get to know her, as well as show our affection for her creating, for bringing Liz to life for us all those years ago, 53 years ago now. Well, these pictures have been on Twitter.
Tell me about it. I was born the year that was screened, so
wow.
I was born in May. So the series, John Pertwee arrived in January.
Will Hadcroft arrived just a few short months later. Well, you're going to like these pictures. You're going to like these pictures even more because these hail from 1970, and these have been trending over the last day or two. And they feature Caroline John, not as Liz Shaw, but as herself. Here she is in the makeup chair, having the finishing touches put to her face there and her hair by the makeup staff. And you can see in the background there's the 2 guys who play the astronauts that come back to Earth in the Ambassadors of Death. So they're all there. And I love pictures like this, Will, because they speak of, obviously it's nice to see the actors out of character, just as themselves, either relaxing or working or a little bit of both. but they've just got that. There she is. I mean, in the roll neck jumper there. God, that looks like an itchy one, doesn't it? But it's so 1970s, isn't it?
Yeah, and the eye makeup and, like you said, the hairstyles. Yeah,
I've never
those
seen
tight pullovers that people wore.
I've never seen these pictures before. Have you?
No, I've not. No, I don't know where they've been hiding. Yeah, looks great though.
Got another one there. Now,
Real captures the moment.
Yeah, she's just sort of chuckling to herself there. And I think that the two astronauts, I think they're having a fag. I can see her. They're passing around a cigarette. There's an ashtray there. But again, just the coats hung up. It's all so ordinary. It's like any workplace, isn't it? And I suppose we do kid ourselves sometimes, don't we? That making Doctor Who is so uber glamorous.
Yeah. But behind the scenes, just a job.
Yeah.
I suppose that's why some actors do view it that way. You know, they're surprised by the fact that it's remembered the way it is, when to them it was like a 4-week job, and then they moved on to something else.
And I've got to say, give credit to Paul Carmichael for sharing these. There's a final one. I don't know how they managed to get this shot. Look, somebody must have been stood up on the makeup desk there, because we've got one of the astronauts having his makeup applied as well. I mean, look at her eyebrows, that woman on the right there. Fabulous. Very on the buzzes. Yeah. Well, I think whether you said that story was broadcast the year you were born, but obviously there are lots that predate you, just as there are that predate me. And this fans of the new series who've come along, they've got decades worth of stuff that they can go back to, haven't they? And to speculate about. And I was thinking about this the other day. Have stories such as Paradise Towers or The Mark of the Rani and all these other things, people who weren't around to see them screen, do newer fans wonder, what was it like in that time? And because there's a lot more photos, aren't there, floating around of making those stories than there are of things like the Ambassadors of Death. So I think when we do get a little bit of a crack in the door back in time to something like that, I have to sort of save those photos and put them in a little folder on my computer. Don't know when I'm going to look at them again, but I do. I always save them.
They do wonder what it was like, and sometimes assume what it was like. I've seen younger fans on a program like this discuss classic era stuff and saying, of course, back then everybody thought this, and I'm watching thinking, no, they didn't. Because they're just going off received wisdom and what's written in fan presses and so forth, and they don't always get it right because they weren't there when it happened, and they weren't there when the programs were being broadcast. They're not aware of the general feeling amongst the public feeling about Doctor Who. Obviously, me and you, we remember how the public responded to stories that some fans think are great. But the public perception was that it was deteriorating when we go towards the end of the 1980s. These are feelings that a modern audience, if they haven't read about it or heard someone discuss it, they don't know those things. So sometimes they get it wrong when they hark back to the classic era. But then we would, if we were thinking about 60s Who, wouldn't we? It was
exactly the same for me. There was so much received fan wisdom when I first joined organised fandom in the late 80s. And it was almost too much. I found it very overwhelming because, and the little things that I thought I knew, and particularly the things that I thought that everybody loved, I found out that no, not everybody does. And particularly when they're things that I'd always loved. What, you don't think that the Twin Dilemma is fantastic? What? I would have those kind of conversations with people, and I'd get the funny looks and things. I thought, no, well, these are supposed to be my people. What's gone wrong?
Yeah. That's the thing with any kind of fandom, I suppose. And if you don't mix with that many of the fans, and I didn't, I was quite isolated as a youth, as far as fandom was concerned. You have it in your head what is true and what is false and what is good and what is bad. And then when you meet up with people who contradict those feelings, it can be quite difficult. Because you think, I thought everybody thought this. And then you find out it might be only you or only a handful who do. It can be quite tricky.
Anybody would think that we're completely obsessed with the show, wouldn't they? Just like Ricky with his TARDIS in his back garden there. But it is a curious thing being a fan of this show. And whilst I wouldn't say that Doctor Who fans were ever pariahs, in the 80s and the 90s, they were a source of some scorn and derision, I think, not least of all, quite often, in fact, from the BBC themselves. Do you remember the famous Anorak?
Oh, yes,
from the 1992 Resistance is Useless documentary?
With his Birmingham accent? I do indeed, yeah. Yeah.
And the thing about that, I mean, the Birmingham accent just sort of seals it, doesn't it? But I remember that documentary airing and the excitement of those repeats starting in 92. The Doctor had been off for a few years and things like that. And it seemed like it was finally getting, if not respect, it was finally getting welcomed in from the cold by the BBC. They were accepting that there was a place for it, even if it was tucked away on a lesser channel.
It was being acknowledged.
It was being acknowledged that the thing existed. So it was a bit of a backhanded compliment, I suppose, when they introduced the thing with a shot at the fans. I mean, I feel quite affectionate towards this now, but at the time, within my social group, all this did to them was confirm that their mate Dan was a weirdo, because even the BBC thought so. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And to have him presenting it with that monotone voice, it wasn't just the accent; it was the way the narration was delivered. It was all this kind of anal retentive information kind of thing. It played to the stereotype of what a fan is.
I suppose that may have changed over the decades. We're going to try and discover that, aren't we, in this conversation between the two of us? But it is a funny thing to be told that one is obsessed with anything, when other people, when third parties say, you're obsessed. Yeah. Because
my mother used to say it to me. She or maybe we'll go into this a little bit later on as well. She got quite exasperated, in fact, and worried for my mental health, really, because I'd become so preoccupied with it and talked about little else. And opportunities to make friends were often ruined because it was all I would talk about. So they'd get bored and go. The frustrations that I used to feel in wanting to make friends, but always struggling with it because I wanted somebody who loved Doctor Who. And there weren't that many around in the mid to late 80s. And then things like, as all teenagers go through, they want to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever, and that's not happening. And you become aware in yourself that the problem, you hate to admit it, but the problem is you are creating these situations yourself because of the fanaticism. But at the same time, if you're using it as an anchor, like I was, you needed it. It wasn't just something that you enjoyed. You needed it. It was something you were clinging to. So it created its own problems. It was both the bandage, but also the illness.
When you say clinging to, do you mean in a sense that, particularly as a child, because children tend to thrive. I've raised enough of them. I always say this to people. Children thrive on routine, don't they? So do you mean that you got a sense of security knowing it was there every Saturday at 5:45 or whatever it was? Or do you mean...
I certainly had that, but I was clinging to it because I felt very out of sync with the rest of the world. I felt very awkward, socially awkward, and alien. I felt like I'd dropped to earth from somewhere else, and I had slightly perceived by others to be slightly odd view of the world, slightly odd view of other people. I was a stereotypical oddbod, very pleasant and polite. All my school reports said that William is pleasant and polite in class, and I always was pleasant and polite.
So was I.
I was very much out of sync. I felt odd. I wasn't just behaving odd, I felt it. I knew I was different and not in a good way. So Doctor Who... At
that age, Will, you're going to stand out if you are pleasant and polite. It's sort of one of the most unfashionable, least desirable things to be. You should be rude and obnoxious, and you should be sort of pushing the doors that say pull, and all those kind of things. That rebelliousness in children, that kicks in quite early, doesn't it? Particularly with boys.
Yeah. Well, what I was doing, I didn't think it at the time, but looking back, I see it was true that I was rebelling against the rebels. I was quite,
Consciously.
Yeah. I can remember a boy at school in my first year at secondary school saying, "You've not started swearing yet, have you?" And I said, "No." And inside I was thinking, and I'm not going to. That might sound obnoxious and pretentious now, but I can remember thinking that and being quite resolute. I had a very strong sense of who I was and what I was about, and I was not going to compromise. And again, that attracts trouble. Once they pick up on it, you are going to become a target for the bullies.
Do you think that lines up with when you say you needed Doctor Who? I mean, this was the other thing I was going to ask. Was it that you just didn't need the program, but that the lead character, the central character, acted as a kind of moral center for you? Because the Doctor doesn't swear, does he?
Yeah.
Whereas other children, their heroes,
No, I think
it's more than likely that their heroes would swear, or they would certainly use more colourful language. There'd be more confrontational, more adversarial, more physical.
Yeah. I think that was an appeal. Certainly at primary school, where Tom Baker was the Doctor for the whole of my primary school life. I was 4 when he took it over, and 10 3/4 when he left. So the way Tom Baker was fascinated me as a boy, as I was very shy and struggled. At primary school, I had quite a good life, and I interacted well with my classmates. But I even then I was seen to be a little bit odd. I did strange things, like I made lots of stuff out of cardboard and brought it in, and I used to, if I saw something on Blue Peter where there was one where they got it might have been Play School. They've got a cardboard box and all these tubes and boxes and things, and made a kind of helter-skelter thing in and through the cardboard and going in and out of different things, and then you drop a marble in and watch it go all the way around. So I built one of these things, took it in, and everyone was fascinated by it. So I was kind of an eccentric in a good way at primary school. But I latched onto Tom Baker because he kind of had, especially when we get into the Graham Williams era, he had this kind of nothing fazed him at all. So if somebody pointed a gun at him, and threatened him, he'd just pull out a crumpled packet of Jelly Babies and say, "Would you like a Jelly Baby? They're rather good." And it was that kind of thing that I latched onto, where he would be the bully, and he would be bullied. Yeah, he would be bullied, and it didn't bother him at all, And I used to wish I was like that. I wish I could just shake it off like that. It
was as if he was reading that social situation that he was in completely differently from the person he was in it with.
Yeah. It's like in City of Death, where the butler pushes him over onto his knees, and he goes, "Oh, I like your butler. He's so violent," and just grins. And just to be able to react that way when I was I was 9 when that was broadcast. So just to be like that, I so much wanted to be like that. It changed when I made the transition to secondary school, and that's when my problems really began, because I went from a slightly odd boy who classmates were fascinated by on occasion to "you're weird," and it was instantaneous. I can remember the first day.
It's different at primary school, isn't it, Will? Because particularly when you get to the end of primary school, you've all grown up together, and particularly back then, primary school classes were a lot smaller than they are now, and so not only did you all grow up together, but there was fewer enough children that you could almost be like extended family. And in many instances, everybody's parents knew one another as well. If they didn't know one another when you started school, they certainly would do 7 years later by the time you left primary school. So it had that, by the time you got to the final year of primary school, there was a kind of sense of security and some level of general acceptance that you were who you were, and that your place in the puzzle, your piece in the jigsaw was your place, whether you were the odd one or not. People had watched you grow up, and therefore they had, I think other children have a sense of security as well for knowing that you're there, that's Will, that's Tom, that's Peter, that's Sarah, that's whoever, and you become this sort of larger family. I think they've lost that in primary schools now.
Yeah, well, the transition from that to secondary school, I can remember that on the first day, first of all, being overwhelmed by how many people were there. I can remember standing in the play court before we went into the building and being so overwhelmed by all these people and older boys who were more aggressive than I'd ever encountered before. And I can remember standing by this wall and wanting to push myself into the brickwork and disappear. That was my real first taste of serious social anxiety, and it's etched into my memory now. I can feel it now as I'm talking about it. Horrible. So when you talk about, was Doctor Who more than just something that you look forward to on a Saturday night? After a while, certainly in my early teens, it became something that I needed. I needed it. And when you talk about the character of the Doctor being a very moral character, that did appeal very much so, yes. I mean, Peter Davison played it straight down the line as a wholesome character, didn't he? A gentleman, really, the way Peter played it. And then when Colin took it over, he really was the sort of personality that I was. That edginess and awkwardness and the bluntness of him, because I had sometimes could have a problem with being too candid and too, what's the word, not guarded enough really, with my own feelings and thoughts. And I would say things and be blunt and sometimes offend people as a result, unintentionally. So along comes this Doctor, the sixth Doctor, who is kind of the same way. So I latched onto him because he was alien and detached, but at the same time caring and moral. He had a strong moral core and he had ethics that he stuck to. But he was, as some have described, unlikable. I don't think he was unlikable myself.
No, neither do I.
It's gone down in history as the one that was unlikable, and I think that's nonsense. I think I wanted the Doctor to be, because after Tom Baker left and Peter took it over, I struggled with Peter for quite a while because I saw Doctor Who as eccentric and otherworldly, and Peter was neither. So when Colin came along, it felt like it was being restored to what it should be. I know older fans saw it as the start of the decline of the programme, but for me, Colin was a restoration to what it should have been between Tom and Colin. So I was very happy when he returned. And that was my most obsessive period of all, Colin Baker.
Just to back up a little from what you were saying earlier on, because I remember starting secondary school as well. And I also remember that feeling, just as you described. I'd forgotten about it until you mentioned it. When I went up to secondary school, I remember going into the reception hall of the building, and there was lots of children who, obviously, it was their first time. They were in the same situation as I was, but some of them, I think, were more used to more people than I was. The noise was deafening. We'd all got pieces of paper telling us where we were supposed to go, but nobody really knew. We were still sort of bumbling around a little aimlessly. So it was very, very intense. But also another thing I remember about it was, now at primary school, all kids in Great Britain have to wear school uniform. But back then, in the 70s and the 80s, primary school kids didn't wear school uniforms. The first time you'd have to wear them would be going to secondary school. And I felt so self-conscious. I felt so self-conscious, and I felt constricted and confined, and like I felt almost like a soldier, I suppose. That I'd lost something of myself being stuck in this blazer and matching trousers, buttoned right up to my. I can still feel how tight that shirt was on my collar, and a tie as well. I never worn a tie ever. The fact that there was elastic on the tie, it wasn't. Was it elasticated? Yes, I think the first one was. I just felt really constricted by it all, and as if this isn't me.
Yeah, it was like although I didn't discover it for many years later, the prisoner, really. I felt like, I'm superimposing this onto my own self now, but I felt like number 6 in the village, you know, and I was like number 6 in the village in my approach to it. No, I'm not having it. I'm not changing. I'd observed that certain children who I'd known at primary school and was friends with had suddenly changed personality when they came into this place, because the way you know, people who are not on the autism spectrum describe the other people who the people who are autistic, describe them as neurotypical. That's the phrase. And the neurotypical people, the kids observed very quickly that if they were to survive, they would have to conform. They would have to fall in line. If everyone is effing and blinding, I'll be effing and blinding. If everyone's telling vulgar jokes, I'll tell vulgar jokes. And whatever the pop music is and the TV shows and all, you know, all the interests, I'll just fall in line with it. And I will have a more comfortable ride as a result. Well, I was resisting that deliberately, thinking, no, this is not who I am, and I am not doing it. As I say, when I discovered The Prisoner years later, I thought, oh, I love this guy. This guy's like me. But I was kind of...
Do you think that the Doctor, in particular, Colin's take on the character there, kind of represents a similar thing? Because Colin, he hadn't quite got the snarl that McGowan had, but he wasn't far off. He was a very resolute incarnation of the character, even when he knew he was being unreasonable, and cruel, albeit with a small c. It was as if he knew, but he was going to go with it anyway. He was going to. He knew his reasons for being as he was in any given moment, didn't he?
Yeah, I think I keyed into it as well. I never thought this at the time, but looking back, I think because my grandmother and my mother were quite serious people, and they had a sense of humor, you know, they could have a laugh, but they were quite serious minded, and I think I was possibly seeing them in him. I think I was latching onto him because he reminded me of them on a subconscious level. I mean, the way that the Sixth Doctor corrects Peri's grammar, for example, you know, when she comes out with a piece of American slang, or what is it in the Two Doctors when she says, why would the Time Lords want to set them up, or whatever it was? Yeah. Oh, frame, that's it. Why would anyone want to frame the Time Lords? And he goes, frame? Oh, set them up. I used to think that was hilarious. I watch it now and I find it obnoxious now. But at the time, at 15, I thought that was hilarious, because that would be something that my grandma would do.
when people say that Colin's character didn't soften or didn't change in any way, or was all brash and there was no warmth there, I remember the line where he says to her, I'm about to follow what you would term as a hunch.
A hunch, yeah. I also didn't mind. People seem to pick up on this thing of him saying things 3 times as well, as though it gets annoying. It didn't annoy me. I loved it. When I was a boy, you know, watching these things in my mid-teens, and when Peri says, I think you may be just still a little bit unstable, and he goes, unstable? Unstable? And it goes up and up. I used to wait for him to do it. You know, I loved it when he did that. Now,
so you didn't feel pushed away by this character. It was quite the opposite for you.
I love the Sixth Doctor. And as I came to sort of, like when Colin would be interviewed on Saturday Superstore and then later on Wogan, I came to love Colin as well, really. I because I was shy and insecure and nervous a lot of the time, and had very low self-esteem. I used to watch him the way he was chatting away with Mike Reed on Saturday Superstore, and later with Terry Wogan. I used to think, I hope when I'm an adult, I will be like him, because he seems to have got it together. He was intelligent, sharp, witty. So I loved his Doctor, and I loved him as well.
He was the one
to be like him.
I completely agree. I used to record all those bits. I've still got them on tape upstairs. So I used to record all those bits off all those shows that you just mentioned. I recorded them all and watched them over and over again. I know every word of those as if they're an episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah,
and you're right. Colin was so genial, so charming, and he was like, it was as if he was so comfortable.
Yeah.
In that moment on those sofas, talking to those people, whoever they were, he seemed like the kind of guy you could drop into any social situation, and he was at the same time he was being himself, but he would make those people respond to him in a really favourable way, even if he was being cheeky, even if he was being slightly brash, he'd win them over. Whereas when you see Peter on sofas in interviews, I wouldn't say it's as if he doesn't want to be there, but you can tell it's not his natural environment. There's a kind of look in his eyes if to say this is part of the job, so I do it because it comes with the territory. And with Tom, well, we all know what Tom's like in interviews. Yeah. He can be wildly different, wildly inappropriate, or gleefully childlike. There's various different versions you can get of Tom, but Colin was always a fantastic ambassador, not just for the show, but for, I suppose, for himself and for his craft. And I suppose at a time where people were forming opinions of his performance, but maybe because people were resistant to his choices, what they perceived as his choices, weren't they? And there he was, being perfectly charming on all those shows. I think there are a lot worse heroes to have than Colin's Doctor. And so, how did you? When you were making your way through secondary school, was that at the time when Colin was the Doctor? So he was as if he was there at your shoulder the entire time.
He took over in March '84, so I was just approaching my 14th birthday then. So when I made the transition to secondary school, that was 1981. So Tom Baker had just left, March '81. Then we go through the summer holidays, and then after that, after I'd started secondary school, I remember coming up to the what do we call it, half-term break. And then after the half-term break, I mean, that was such a relief. Oh, a week off, blooming heck. I needed a break from that place. And then when we got back after half-term break, the 5 Faces of Doctor Who. And that was really when things started to become more obsessive. With season 17, there was Destiny of the Daleks. So I suppose that was the point where, and Doctor Who Weekly being published by Marvel Comics. So that was the point where Doctor Who had gone from being one of my favorite programs, because I love $6 Million Man, The Bionic Woman, The Incredible Hulk, all these shows from the 70s. But when Doctor Who Weekly came, I then had access to Doctor Who every week, even in the months when it was not on air.
On TV.
So I think that was the start of me becoming more interested in it and it becoming the favorite program. So I had that. I then, through the comics, started to see the history of the program, the things that my parents had told me about William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee. Did
you have that moment where your mother or your father or another family member said, well, of course, Tom Baker wasn't the first one, you know?
Yeah. And my mother didn't like him. I mean, we all talk about him being the definitive Doctor, but she thought he, especially in the kind of Douglas Adams era, you know, he was sending it up, laughing up his sleeve at the monsters, not taking it seriously, grinning all over the place and passing jelly babies around. She really did not like him. She used to say, William Hartnell wouldn't do this. William Hartnell wouldn't have a robot dog. You know, she really didn't like it. But of course, Tom was the Doctor to me. So then we go to the season 18, and suddenly theme music is different, and the title sequence, and Adric coming into it. Oh, there's a boy coming into it who's going to travel with the Doctor.
How did all that change all at once?
Yeah,
sit with you.
I was stunned by it. I can remember.
But it didn't upset you. It didn't distance you from it at all, because you know if people are on the spectrum, a lot of the time they want things to stay the same, don't they?
I think it fascinated me more than it bothered me. The idea that you could have a tune arranged a different way, but it's still the same melody, fascinated me. That it's different, but it's the same. The title sequence, I was fascinated by that. I can remember wanting them after a while to change it back. I remember thinking,
it's fun for a few weeks, but
I want the tunnel back now. I want the tunnel back. It's great art, and I want the diamond logo back as well. Although I did love the neon one, but after a while, I thought, yeah, I've had enough. I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. The sound effects record.
But I found the change electrifying, and that ramped up my that almost put my fandom clock on. I think that was when it went to Amber. Yeah, and it was the regeneration. It was the regeneration at the end of that season that put the green light on for me.
It just went up and up and up from there on. I was fascinated by the production of the program. I became aware of theme tunes and title sequences because of that change. I started to notice them in other programs. If the music was changed or the titles. I remember reading in Doctor Who Weekly or Monthly prior to season 18 that there was a little article in Gallifrey Guardian saying the TARDIS prop, the police box prop, was looking old and tatty, and the new producer was commissioning a new box. So I can remember when Leisure Hive was broadcasting, and we get that shot of the camera panning past all the changing booths. Yeah. And you knew one of those would end up being the TARDIS. That was the joke of that shot. And then I remember being, fascinated by it, looking for what the differences might be between the previous one and this one. Now, a casual viewer wouldn't even notice that it had changed, but I was fascinated by it. It now had door handles when before it didn't. They now entered and exited through the left-hand door rather than the right-hand door. I was picking up on all of these things and becoming more and more fascinated with it. So by the time we got to the Keeper of Traken and the reveal that the Melker is a TARDIS and it's the Master, and then taking over Treemass at the end and renewing himself, all of that stuff about only 13 lives, really fascinated me. And then Logopolis topped it with the Watcher and the idea, because we knew that Tom Baker was leaving. So the idea that he was going and how he would go. I mean,
it had a feeling of, this is only with hindsight now, it's what we call universe building, wasn't it? Doctor Who had spent several years, in fact, one could argue it had spent 17 previous years, largely going from place to place to place. Everything would change every 4 or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And it was kind of on one particular level, apart from the upheaval of him being exiled to Earth for a little while. It was largely the same. But there was a sense in season 18 that you were building up to something. People always talk about Logopolis in particular with that kind of funereal, that's the word, isn't it? But the entire season was actually like that. It was as if we were moving towards something. Something was looming. Something was coming.
And Paddy Kingsland's incidental music in that Logopolis, my word, funereal is it, isn't it? The style of it, it puts the hairs on the back of my neck up every time I hear the soundtrack to that. But also, I was just going to say, like, where Peter Howell's Leisure Hive music, where is it?
Because
when I got hold of this, my word, the Leisure Hive tune on there. And on the theme music single, the Astronauts, that B-side.
Yes, I played it.
Wonderful music.
Well, I was thinking about what you were saying about it all changing at any given time, and even the box changing. This wasn't. The fact is, changes like that, changes to sets, theme tunes, and title sequences, they weren't unique to Doctor Who, were they? It happened on every show. It happens now. Even the EastEnders and Coronation Street theme tunes and things, they do change, sometimes in quite drastic ways, and sometimes in little ways that only your tuned ear can hear. And they famously rebuilt the entire EastEnders standing set recently, haven't they, for HD and things like that. But generally, the people who watch those shows, they may notice when it's first done. They may.
Yeah.
But most people won't. And even the people that do will have forgotten about it within a week of the show continuing. There's a passiveness to watching most of the shows that Doctor Who is completely exempt from. If you're a particular kind of viewer, I suppose it still is the minority of viewers, but probably more viewers than any other show, because it chimes with something with people like us. And it is why a lot of people got into making television,
isn't it? It's the attention to detail. I think we notice the detail, and I think, well, certainly in my case, it's an autistic trait. It's Aspergers. I didn't know that then, but I know it now. It is, and the obsession with the character, the obsession with the way the program is made. Obsession with writers and musicians and who did what, all that stuff is part of the condition, I feel. In my case, other people may feel differently about themselves, but in my case, I think that's what it is. And it's what made me feel different as a youngster. It's what caused the struggles through secondary school. So when we're talking about how the program impacted on my life through those years, we get to the 5 Faces of Doctor Who. So Logopolis had been and gone, and I'd started then to tape record the soundtrack, because we didn't have a video till 1984. So I used to tape record the soundtrack, and I did that with it would have been the Keeper of Traken when it was repeated. So they ran a few repeats on BBC Two, and then saved Logopolis for the 5 Faces season. So I'd taped Logopolis, the soundtrack, became very obsessed with that, knew the script by heart, and then just watching Hartnell, Troughton, and Pertwee on the 5 Faces season, and watching the Doctor Who's that my parents were talking about, absolutely fascinating, because that was the first time they'd ever been repeated in my lifetime. So that built on it. Then you had a history to the program, and then we get in January '82, after the Christmas break, back to school. But Peter Davison is now the Doctor, and we get season 19, and twice weekly as well. My word, I was getting more and more obsessed, and I think this is when my mother started to see it as a problem, that it wasn't balanced, and wasn't normal in her eyes. She never dealt with anybody who's like that, apart from cousins who are obsessed with football, could be obsessed with football and know everybody in the team and cry when their team fails. But if I burst into tears because Adrix died and it takes me a week to get over it, that's not normal.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I thought you may do. I could never understand, same with me, why this was okay. And this was perfectly understandable. But why me getting wrapped up in Doctor Who was a problem. How did your mother raise the subject with you? Did she sit you down for a quiet conversation, or was she a bit more exasperated? Did it work its way to a head of steam?
It got to the point where there was one particular point where she really blazed at me over it, actually. But the frustration was just building and building inside her. She clearly didn't know what to do with me, really. In the Colin Baker era, it reached its peak, that because I was tape recording the episodes and I knew great chunks of the dialogue by heart, and because I had few friends at that time, I could be found kind of sitting on the edge of my bed reciting the dialogue out loud. So if you can imagine my mother walking past the door and hearing great chunks of the Twin Dilemma being recited, and me doing the different voices as I go over different scenes, it's no surprise that she was worried. You know, what is he doing? Why is he like this?
So she recognized, she knew that it was dialogue from Doctor Who. She didn't think you were reading out loud, for example. She recognized that
she knew. Yeah, she knew what I was doing. I used to make my own Doctor Who stories. I had the sound effects record, I had the theme music single, and I used to get a tape recorder and make up my own stories and do all the voices, which was also seen as quite strange. When I look back now, I just think that's a young boy being very imaginative and really paving the way for what I would do later as an adult. Really, there's a straight line from making those Doctor Who stories in my bedroom to the resurrection plant at age 52, you know. Sadly, she died before that happened, so she never saw that line completed. But that's what I was doing. But she was, she ended up shouting, "You're obsessed!" I can remember it. It cuts me now just thinking of it. But I can't, I can't be rude or cruel or unkind about her. I understand where all that was coming from. She just had enough. And I can remember, I was making a cup of coffee once in the kitchen. So I would have been 16, 17. And I was going over, making the coffee. She's in the living room and I'm in the kitchen. And I'm going over a sequence from Trial of a Time Lord where the Valiard is revealed to be a later incarnation of the Doctor. And the 10 billion years of absolute power. And I'm going over that speech of Colin's, and I could just hear this voice in the living room going, "Stop it, stop that." So I must have been, frustrating. And what do you do with someone who's doing this? How do you stop it? Well, I now think that what she should have done. I mean, it's all right for me to say it now, but I think, having learned more about autism and Asperger's, really, rather than try to stop it, because that was her mistake, really. Don't pull this comfort blanket away from me so that I have nothing, because that's what I was feeling. What would have been better would have been to channel that fascination with television production and acting and all the rest of it, and writing, and try and direct it into some kind of career. That would have been the best thing to do. But we know a lot more about this kind of behavior now. We know Asperger's is accepted and embraced, and in schools, teachers, have various strategies if they come across anyone in class who is like that. There was nothing in the 1980s for a person exhibiting these traits.
I've made no secret of the fact that my eldest son is Asperger's, and he's had several challenges in his life. He was statemented when he was around 8 or 9, and so I raised him and had an education in all of this. It was eye-opening, and so this was in the noughties. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misapprehensions about it then, let alone back in the 80s, and I can't imagine. I mean, when I see how my son has thrived and achieved a lot of his ambitions, and is living a very full life in every respect, but I'm immensely proud and happy for him. But looking back over those challenges, it's still, as a parent, you'd rather somebody not have to endure that. But obviously, I can't imagine the man that he now is. I can't imagine him being any different. He's my son. He's his own man, and I love him for who he is. So I can't imagine him being any other way. And now he lives a very much in his own lane, and makes opportunities opportunities, he makes them work for him. If you follow me, he's very aware of his place on the spectrum, and he knows he approaches life and problems and situations, both social and professional, in different ways. And he's got the presence of mind, I think, and the self-awareness enough to work with that. That people have given him the tools, not just me, not just his parents and the family, but other people have equipped him to make that journey best, I think, for the times that we live in. I've no doubt that in 20 years' time, we'll know more about Aspergers and autism than we do now. And hopefully in 20 years on, and we will continue to understand a lot more. But I was thinking of what you're saying about obsession, and as an adult, obviously to be told that one is obsessed with a television series, any television series, particularly one that's associated and largely as a children's series, it comes with it a certain amount of dismissal, doesn't it? As if we are simple-minded in some way. It's just for children. It's a really strange thing. And as an adult, I find that people ask, "Are you obsessed?" What a strange! It is a strange thing to ask. Well,
because they don't ask you about other things, do they? Like we've said.
Who am I to judge that whether I'm obsessed or not? And who are you to judge me? Why is this even a question in light of the fact that you're the one who's got a season ticket and you're up the Albion every Saturday afternoon, or sometimes twice a week, spending considerably more money and usually getting into a lot more trouble. Reach out to me through Instagram and Twitter. I'm there as the Spacebook, wheezing, groaning, ranting, raving about all things geeky inside and outside of the TARDIS. And please, if you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to the channel, all that jazz. Don't miss Type 40 live in a couple of days' time. And thank you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We always have the time, if you have the space, here at Type 40 Extra. That's it for another one. See you again soon. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.